Hello, my name's Phil Rosenkrantz, as she said, and I'm from the IME department, Industrial and Manufacturing Engineering, and this is my 28th year of teaching here. I've got this titled, How to Study Math, Science, and Engineering and Other Stuff, because I've expanded this presentation over time to include not just math and science, but also qualitative type courses, which I'll cover my ideas about that in the next session. The session today is the first half of my presentation, and the next week we'll have what I'm calling the second half. Really what I have is a 3-hour seminar that I can deliver, I can present, but I have a 2-hour version and I have a 1-hour version. So you're getting the 2-hour version. The slight modification I'm going to make to the 2-hour version is there's a little bit of the sense that I'm preaching to the choir here with tutors, but I'm going to present what I would say to a group of freshmen or students that need to know how to study better, so that you can see how I present it, and then if you want to pass that on to your students, then you're welcome to. There are some slides that I'm going to just go right past real fast because I have to cut some of it out and economize, but I'm leaving them in the PowerPoint so that they're there for you if you ever want to use it, and Melissa has a master copy. I want to start out with a little bit of a personal story as to why I'm doing this, how I got into it, because I don't think that you would really grab onto or find this compelling if I don't do that. This journey started about 25 years ago. Oh my God, 25 years ago. I was in graduate school for the second time. I had gone to college, got my bachelor's degree, straight through for my first master's degree right after that, went to work. I worked as an engineer for General Motors for about 10 years after I graduated from college with my master's degree. And then I went back to school when I was about 35 years old, and I was working on a Master of Science in Statistics at UC Riverside. So I had done fine in engineering, fine in my graduate studies at Purdue, always was near the top of my class, good math student and all that. My first year at UC Riverside, I did really good. And then in my second year, I started taking the heavy-duty graduate level mathematical statistics classes. And by the way, I was teaching full-time here, married with 3 kids. I had my 4th kid in the middle of my master's program. And active in my church, active in scouting, just really active. And here I was taking a full load at UC Riverside. Why? Because I could do it. Just that gut, brute force approach. My first year went okay because, frankly, some of the stuff was review. But then when I got into the heavy-duty mathematical statistics, and by the way, I was the only engineer in the group. Everybody else were math majors. I did not do too well my first quarter in those graduate level classes. I didn't flunk. I passed the classes, but I did not do that well. By the grace of God, I walked into one of my Cal Poly classes early one day at the time I was finishing up that dismal quarter. I walked into a class early, and it was a class on math study skills. And they were showing a videotape by Dr. Metlitsky. Do you know her? Anybody? She's still here? She could have retired. Not Maslowski, Metlitsky. That's different. So, erase that off the tape, would you, Terry? The videotape said some things that I had never heard before about studying. So I only caught the last 10 minutes. So I went and I borrowed it and I watched it, and it changed my life in terms of my study skills, my study approach. It totally changed the way I looked at studying math. I became a student of how to study math and science, and I've been doing that for 25 years. I've got a collection of books on how to study math. I don't know how many I have, probably around 15 different books on how to study math. And I've done a little bit of my own research, and I've done some of my own developing of ideas, and that's kind of what's led me to where I'm at right now. In fact, I've got some new things I'm going to share with you today that I haven't included in presentations before. So here's the story. I used the methods I learned about, and in the next quarter, I had to take the second course in mathematical statistics. I had the same instructor as the previous quarter, the one I didn't do too well. He was a brilliant guy, but he was probably one of the most difficult in terms of the material he presented. It was a whole quarter of just real analysis. That's what it was. It was statistics taught through analysis eyes, because that's what he loved. And so the next quarter, I was the only engineer. I was the only one working. Everybody else was just a full-time graduate student. Many of them supported by their country or somebody to be a full-time student. But in the next quarter, using the techniques I'm going to teach you, I got the highest grade on the final exam, and I got the second highest grade in the class. And I used those techniques for the rest of my time in finishing my master's. And I did okay for the rest of the time, and I didn't have any more bad grades, and I wasn't stressed out. Of course, one of the things I did was, instead of trying to finish in 3 years, I changed that to 4. And that taking out that extra class that I was taking that I shouldn't have been was what made one of the big differences. So then I taught those techniques for a while, and then in 97, I guess, I went back to school again, and I got my doctorate at Pepperdine, and I used the techniques again, and I just had a blast. I had fun, graduated with a 4.0, really enjoyed myself, and using the techniques that I'm teaching you now. And so I just wanted to put that in there. Let me say this also. Over the last 20 years, I've had students that I've talked to, who I've presented this material to, who, before they heard what I had to say, they really didn't have a study plan. They didn't have a strategy. And they were doing poorly, and they were on their way to flunking out. And it wasn't because they weren't capable. It was that they didn't have a roadmap. And what happened in many of those cases was once they started using the techniques that I was teaching, they went from a CD student to an AB student almost instantly. They went from not having a strategy to having a strategy that worked. That's what they were lacking. And I've had students come back to me and tell me that they tried some of the things I said, and it worked. So I believe that most of the reasons students fail is they're trying to do too much work in school, big Cal Poly problem, poor time management and organization, ineffective strategy, and more so now than I would say in the past are time wasters. You know what time wasters are? Darn right you know. Facebook, Twitter, Internet, you can go on and on, right? And another one, addictions to everything you could think of. And I questioned that. I do research with my students, and when that came up, I questioned them why that came up so high. And they said, no, it's true. That's what's going on. Well, I need to move on. So, like I said, my experience is most students are capable, but they don't have a strategy, or they're trying to do too much. And so that's one of the things that I try to advise people on, is how to balance your life out. That's one of my big messages, is balance. I believe that study life can be broken down into 3 phases. Phase 1 is planning ahead and choosing classes. That's everything you do to get ready for the quarter. Choosing the right schedule, the right instructors, having your work in balance with your personal life and your school life, getting all set up, because if you don't do that, you're almost doomed just because of poor planning. There might be nothing you could do to save yourself. If you're taking 5 ME classes and working 20 hours, you're doomed. So I think phase 1 is getting yourself set up to be successful. Phase 2 is what I call inside class activities. That's taking notes, listening, taking tests, being a good citizen in the classroom. And phase 3, I call outside class activities. So what do you do with those notes you took? How do you do your homework? How do you study? How do you prepare? Well, how do you do term papers and projects? I talk about that. What about visiting your instructor during their office hours? So I'm going to talk about the big picture of balancing out your life, some do's and don'ts, how to be better organized. I teach 3 strategies for taking notes. Most students have 1 strategy and they use it for every class. I teach 3 strategies depending on the type of class. Is it very quantitative? Is it qualitative? Or there's a middle ground where it's quantitative but it's not too intense. And I teach 3 different strategies for what you do with those notes. So that's a little difference between me and some of the other things you might see. How to study, how to take tests, how to read books and write papers. And if this was a entry-level class, I might be talking more about what are the important policies to know about in the school, but you probably are well past that. Some strategies for choosing classes and instructors. And then the last bullet there, I'll talk about my approach to taking those qualitative classes, the humanities, social sciences, and that, a study technique for those. So what is different about mathematically based subjects? What we're teaching is a process. There's a progressiveness to it. There's a step-by-step list of rules on how to do most mathematical procedures. And we need to learn those in order to be successful so that we can do them quickly. And in engineering, which is who I usually am giving this to, we want to be able to not only understand those step-by-step methods, but we want to be able to use them in the design process. And so I believe that in order for those things to come out, they have to be in there. And if somebody has just done surface learning and they haven't internalized these concepts, it's hard for them to come out during the design process. So that's one of my big themes. My major concept is that we need to be working on what we might call deep learning as opposed to surface learning. Most Cal Poly students that I have in my classes, their study method, their approach is geared towards surface learning, which is learn enough to get through my tests and quizzes, get a grade, and get on with it. Now, whether they learn something or not, that's not necessarily their primary concern or what they're trying to do. And they think that if they learn something long enough to take the quiz or the test, that they've learned it well enough, and they figure, well, if I need to know it again, they'll tell me again, or I'll learn it again, or I can go back and look it up. And we've created a culture of surface learners at this university. And I can show you some books that discuss this, but that's beyond the scope of this presentation. I am teaching you a method that's geared toward deep learning, not surface learning, so that you don't have to repeat classes, so that you have the knowledge so that you can use it again. And that, I believe, probably everybody in here is probably already, in that mode to some degree, but I think you're working with people that are in the surface learning mode. One of the things we need to understand is our memory, and I could make a whole presentation just on memory, but we have different types of memory, short-term, medium-term, and long-term. For example, do you remember where you parked your car today? Do you remember what you had for dinner last night? Okay. Where did you park your car on January 5th? Now, some of you know because you park at the same place every time. What did you have for dinner on January 5th? Now, I know what I had on January 5th because that was my anniversary and we went out to dinner, but that's cheating. See, there's short-term memory where you can remember that stuff just 24 hours, long enough to take the quiz, take the test. But how do you get it into long-term memory? You get it there through repetition, through using it, through thinking about it, through meditating, through reinforcement, through drill. Nobody likes to hear that. But most of you learned math how? You worked a lot of math problems when you were in 9th grade. And my contention is, I'm going off subject here. The most important thing you could do is nail Algebra 1. If you nail Algebra 1, if you own Algebra 1, I think you're in pretty good shape from then on. But if you don't do good in Algebra 1, I think you're struggle. We'll talk about that some other time. But anyway, I have more on that. This is a model that's online with a site that I'm linked to. I have my own website on math study skills. Some of you might have come across it. And most of this material is in there in great detail. But the idea there is that we want to get stuff past the short-term memory and into long-term memory. And we get that by rehearsing it and using it and repeating it until it gets into long-term memory, and then we can retrieve it when we need it. Now, let me ask a question. How many of you play or played sports? Were in athletics of some kind? Okay. What was your sport?
Football and hockey.
Football and hockey. How did you learn how to play football and hockey?
My dad, brother.
Okay, what did you do? Did they took you into the living room and they talked to you about football and hockey and they showed you books? How did you learn it?
Just watching football and playing football.
You played mostly. Okay. How many of you play any musical instrument? Okay. How did you learn to play the musical instrument? You practiced. How much time did you spend in a classroom watching a lecture on how to play your musical instrument? How many of you perform like music or drama? Any of you? How do you prepare for that? Memorize your lines. Okay.
It's all memorization by repetition.
And then do you rehearse?
Of course.
Of course. You practice, rehearse. That's the way math and science is. As opposed to qualitative subjects where you're going to get into reflection and introspection and things like that. Math is more like sports and music and drama and those kinds of things. The coaches get it, all right? But we teachers, we have a tendency to think if I explain it once, you've got it. But that's not the way it works. Now, let's move on a little bit. I've divided this up into the three phases, 3 parts of this presentation. I hope to get through the pieces of phase 1 today, and then into phase 2, into the note-taking skills, and then I don't think I'm going to finish that part today. That's the big chunk, the note-taking skills. That's the showcase of this whole thing. And then come back next week, talk about exams, and then the other things in phase 3. That should say phase 3 up on that slide. I just noticed that on the top right. So talk about a few of the items in phase 1, not all of them. But phase 1, these are the 5 things that I list. But one of the most important things is what I call the big picture. And here I'm talking about you plan your week ahead of time to where you balance out the various areas of your life, academic, financial, personal, family, social, spiritual. You balance them out. Now, you're not going to be totally balanced while you're in school, but you need to have some balance. And that way you can last the long term. This is a marathon, not a sprint. And unfortunately, some students operate as if it's a sprint and they burn out. This is a marathon. You have to pace yourself. I believe that if you're spending more than 60 to 70 total hours per week on school plus work, then you may be out of balance. Now, some of you might think 60 to 70 hours a week is not very much for school and work. But my contention is that if you're doing that, more than that every quarter, you might be on your way to being out of balance and burning out and having other problems. And so what I teach is a little bit different than some people. I teach that you create a time picture for yourself. I have a handout here I'm going to give you in a moment. You can start passing it out. There's 168 hours in a week. You've heard that before. You've maybe filled out a time picture where you show what your plan is for each hour of the week, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But here's what I do that's different than most people. I teach that when you're doing your time picture, the first thing you block out is your personal time, not your work time or your school time. I teach block out your personal time. And so that would be time for yourself, time for eating, and time for being with friends and relatives, going out on dates, watching your favorite TV show, and could be mental growth, or spiritual growth, personal study, going to church, reading books. That's all your personal time. And I teach that you schedule that first. And you're probably wondering, why is he saying that? And obviously the last one there is you can't go overboard. Here's my philosophy for that. And this is what I learned from that video 25 years ago. How many of you have ever had a quarter where you start the quarter and you say, last quarter wasn't that great. I could have studied more. I could have done better. This quarter is going to be different. I'm going to go to every class. I'm going to do all my homework. I'm going to turn it in on time. I'm going to study for tests and quizzes. And I'm not going to be distracted by other things that get in my way. I'm going to really bear down. And then the first 2.5 weeks, you go to class, you do all your homework, you're turning it in, you've got your first quiz coming up. Let's say it's a physics quiz. And you're all ready to study for it, and your friends come by and say, hey, we're going out for pizza, do you want to come? So you're thinking to yourself, you're conflicted. You want to study for your physics quiz because you got the quiz tomorrow, but your friends are going out, and then you start to rationalize, and you say, well, you know what, I can go out for pizza, and then I'll come back, and I'll still study for my quiz. You're thinking about, will that work? And then finally, the one that gets you is you rationalize, you go that extra step, and you say, I've been so good for 2.5 weeks, I deserve to go out for pizza. So you go out for pizza, but not only do you have pizza, you have a couple of beers, you come back. There's no way you're studying for your physics quiz. You get up in the morning and you go take your physics quiz, you get it back and you look at it and you go, you know what, I messed up. I could have done better. I should have studied. And then you're kind of, that's kind of your life. You felt like you deserved to go out. You didn't want to be deprived. Okay? That's scenario 1. Scenario 2 is the scenario I'm teaching. Scenario 2 is you've got your time picture, which I'll go into a little more detail. And you've already scheduled on Friday night, you're going out for pizza with your friends, and Saturday night you're going out on a date. Sunday you're going to go be with your family. Your social life is looking pretty good. You've got those things planned in. You can anticipate them. You can look forward to them. They're on your schedule. You got your favorite TV show is on your schedule, whatever that might be. I know for about 4 or 5 years I didn't watch TV, but then it's Wednesday, your friends come by, and they say, hey, we're going out for pizza, you want to come? Now, here's the difference. You're going out for pizza on Friday night, you got a date on Saturday, you're going to see your family on Sunday. You don't feel deprived. You don't have that psychological trick working on you. And so now it's a lot easier to say, oh, you guys go ahead, I'm going out on Friday night. I got to study for my physics quiz. That's a lot different mindset. It's a mind game thing you got to make sure you're playing. So if you have a balanced life, it's a lot easier to study when you plan to study, follow a schedule, do the things you know you need to do, because you know you're going to get to do the other stuff. Here's another one. If you're working too much and you come home from work and you've got 2 hours free to study, sometimes, let's face it, you don't feel like studying, do you? You say, I got 2 hours to myself, and the next thing you know, those 2 hours are gone. You've totally wasted them. And it's because of this mind game. I deserve some time to myself. I need to check my Facebook, whatever it is, and the next thing you know, those 2 hours of prime time is gone. Does this make any sense to you? Does it have any semblance of reality? So, if you multiply the number of units you take by 4 and add to that the number of hours you work, I suggest you keep that total less than 64. Now, 64, 65, I mean, you can play around with that number, but it's a rule of thumb. And if your Cal Poly proven GPA is high, say above a 3, you maybe can make that multiplier 3, but let's make it 4. Why 4 hours per unit? Well, you need 1 hour to attend class, 2 hours to study, and that includes fixing up your notes, reading, homework, studying for quizzes and tests, research, and writing papers. That's an average. But you need another hour for an allowance for driving to school, visiting instructors, club activities, meetings, eating a lunch or a snack, field trips and stuff like that. So that 4 hours you can account for. And what happens is a lot of students will sign up for classes and they don't have those hours in their schedule. They have the hours for attending class in their schedule, but they don't have the hours for all this other stuff, and it comes back to haunt them later on. So here's an example where the green represents personal time already mapped in first. I got personal time in the morning, personal time in the evening, pizza, a date, a TV show, going to church, seeing your family. I got that in there, including sleep. So there's, biggest personal item is sleep. Then I put in work in there. This person works 2 nights a week and part of the day on Saturday. And I've done a little math there showing that this student could take 12 units. using my formula. And now this is the same as your handout. If they take 3 4-unit classes, I have an English 104, I put an IME class in here, and a Math 114 calculus in, and those are 2-day-a-week classes, then I showed what the rest of it would look like. I've got driving to school in there, reading, working on notes, studying, doing homework, a lot of homework time on Friday, some on Thursday morning, reading time. But you'll notice I have office hours in there. That's visiting faculty office hours. And here I have library, spending some time in the library. And then you'll also notice that I have flex hours. And flex hours are something that I heard in one of my experiences with this research is flex hours are hours that you schedule for schoolwork, but if you don't have to use them, then they become personal time. So they're there to use on a flexible basis. So this person, if they don't need to do something on Thursday night, it's open. And then all Sunday afternoon is open. Now, we talked momentarily a little while ago about, yeah, these schedules are nice, but students don't stick to them. Therein lies the problem. Why don't they stick to them? Part of it is the feeling of being deprived. They don't have flex time in there, and they don't have enough personal time. They're out of balance. But what I contend is that if you did something like this, and you said, okay, every Tuesday morning I'm going to spend every Wednesday morning I'm going to spend an hour in the library. Doing what? Whatever I have to do in the library. Whatever I might need the library for, I'm going to be in the library. Now, some of you never go to the library other than to go to the LRC. Some students never go to the library. But students should go to the library for doing research, doing papers, and stuff like that. I'm going to talk about that next time. Going to office hours of faculty. Where's your time in for that? If somebody were to treat their schoolwork just like they treated a job, just like they treated, if you're on a sports team, you go to practice whenever you feel like it. Hey, I don't feel like going to practice today, or hey, I feel like practicing now. It's Thursday morning. Well, I want to do it now. Well, the team doesn't practice till Thursday night. Well, I want to do it now. We tend to treat school like it doesn't matter. It's when I get around to it. And if a student could change into a little more structure and say, I'm going to do it at a certain time, then they'll find that it's easier, it's more fun, and their life actually becomes better. And when I started doing this, it actually put more joy back into my learning. And I started enjoying things better. And I'll tell you what was really fun for me. Because of what I was doing with my notes, when I walked into class the next time, I was up to speed on everything that had been lectured on before. So when the instructor started lecturing, whether it was math or whatever, I was on top of it and I could follow it. Everybody else was lost. And I enjoyed following what the instructor said. I was learning. I was getting depth of knowledge. I wasn't just writing notes. And I got to where after class I would go transcribe my notes because I wanted to. I wanted to make sure I nailed what had just been lectured on. I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm trying to build a case for putting together something like this where you're well balanced and what the advantages are of doing that. So I went ahead and made a color copy of this slide because it's kind of hard to read up there. So with that example, it pretty much follows what I talked about in terms of adding up to 168 hours. And this uses the 4 times the multiplier, 4 times the number of units. Now I'm going to skip through this and a few others because it's what I need to kind of economize on in order to cover the more intimate stuff about taking notes and math study skills. But it talks about balancing your schedule, some policies you should know about, choosing classes. I think for many of you this is pretty standard stuff. Choosing instructors I did want to mention before I moved on. And I've noticed we do a survey in our department about students, and it's an advising survey, and we get an idea of what their attitudes are about advising and everything. And one of the interesting things has to do with choosing instructors. And I recommend that you look for instructors and you counsel the students you're tutoring to find instructors that are good teachers, not necessarily instructors that are known to be easy or something like that. And some students like to use those instructor rating websites, and those could be useful if they're used properly. But the caution here is that the easiest instructor may actually be the one that causes you the most work. Why? Because you end up having to learn the material on your own. Or you have to relearn the material. In this survey question on our survey, it says, I sometimes refer to websites such as rateyourprofessor.com or gradecalpoly.com when choosing instructors. Now, the yellow bar on the right are students that responded to the survey that have a 3.0 GPA or higher. And the blue bar represents students that have a 2.5 GPA or less. Here's an interesting thing to note. The biggest users of those websites were the lower GPA students. And look, on the strongly disagree column that they use it, there were, you'll notice that the highest, the only bar, and it was fairly high, was for the better students. And so I don't know, maybe there's a message there. Maybe some people are overusing those sites, or they're looking for the wrong thing. And all those sites, each one has a little different bent. They have a little different strategy. Some is trying to tell you who the easiest ones are, and some are trying to tell you who the most challenging ones are and stuff. So that's part one. I skipped a couple of topics as you saw in there, but that allows me to move on to part two. See how far we get. These are the inside class activities, like note-taking in particular. And I'm going to start out with mentioning that I teach 3 different note-taking strategies: the transcription method, the annotation method, and the St. Pi method. The transcription method is one that I'm going to spend the most time on, and then I'm going to spend a little bit more, probably the second most time will be on the St. Pi method, and then least amount on the annotation method. But what I'm doing is teaching a way of learning the material during the course of the class, while you're doing your homework, while you're taking notes, while you're taking classes, so that you don't end up cramming for stuff the night before the quiz or the night before the test. And you all know what cramming is, right? That's where you just spend an inordinate amount of time the night before trying to learn the material. Now, we know cramming goes on, don't we? My question is, if a person did all their homework, why do they have to cram? It's because they did their homework, but they didn't learn anything. They got stuff on paper and they handed it in, but they didn't learn it. My method is is trying to change that. And the problem with cramming is it's all short-term memory oriented, isn't it? It's how much can I cram into my head tonight, so I'll have it tomorrow. And if I don't know it 2 days from now, I'm not going to worry about that. Now, the transcription method involves rewriting your notes. The annotation and the St. Pi method don't involve rewriting your notes. So the transcription method is more time-consuming, so you can't do that in every class. You have to be discreet about which classes you do it in, and it's probably going to be maybe one class per quarter, at most two. So you have to plan ahead for that. But that would be for your classes like calculus, math analysis, statics, dynamics, some statistics classes, not all of them. Classes that have, say operations research, classes that have a lot of mathematics, step-by-step, details, patterns you need to learn, lots of places where you can have do's and don'ts. That's where you'd use the transcription method. Certainly most of your heavy math classes and engineering science type classes. The annotation method starts out like the transcription method, but you don't rewrite your notes. And then the St. Pi method is totally different than those other two. I teach a 2-column note-taking system. I'm going to start passing these around. We've only got 10 minutes left. But these are some examples of some courses where I did use these methods. If you look in there, you'll see the notes. Now, these two brown covers were with the annotation method where I didn't rewrite the notes. Just circle them. You can start them. We can start them over there. But this is annotation method where I didn't have to rewrite them. I just fixed them up. Now, if you look in here, you'll notice that there's color coding. You'll see post-it notes sticking around and in the notes section, and you'll see an index at the front of most of them. And those are some of the things that are features of this method. But I started out using the Cornell Notes method. And here I have a picture. Cornell Notes has 3 columns. I have 3 columns essentially, but it's 2 columns up here and then 1 column at the bottom. It's really a margin of about 1 inch to 1.5 inches. This section here is the capture area where you write down everything the instructor says, everything the instructor writes on the board. You're trying to capture everything you possibly can. It amazes me when I'm lecturing, sometimes if I say something really, really important, only some students write it down. If I write it on the board, everybody writes it down. Sometimes I say stuff just to see who writes it down. Like, what if I said, this is really, really, really important to know for the next test? Wouldn't you think everybody would write something on their notes? They don't, because I didn't write it on the board. So, capture everything. This is where you add stuff later, put in notes, list rules, identify concepts. Down here is where you put an index of what's above in terms of new terms and topics. And then you can transfer this information down here to a table of contents or an index. So I've already mentioned here about the what's in column 2, where you capture everything. And I also recommend that you write the sequential page number and the date on the top of every page. If you don't do that already, you'll be amazed at how often that comes in handy. Is there anybody in here that does that automatically? Good, most of you. You find that it helps from time to time? Yeah. You never know when. Then keep an index, and if you look in those notebooks going around, you'll see indexes at the front of the notes. Now, if you had a notebook like that for an open notes test, you're going to kick some royal you-know-what, aren't you? It's pretty helpful. So I suggest you keep that. And then with the transcription method, what you do is you rewrite your notes. You can see most of those are transcribed. And you can see how it's rewritten, and it's real neat. It usually takes me 45 minutes to an hour and 15 minutes to transcribe 1 hour of lecture notes, 15-minute lecture notes, depending on how fast the instructor talks and how much they write. And then what you do is you try to recreate their logic. You try to look for missing steps. You try to understand things you don't understand. And then if you don't understand something and you can't figure it out, you take a Post-it note, you write your question, and you stick it on the page sticking out. You see how I have Post-it notes sticking out of those notebooks? So that's the questions I had. Then what you do is, the next day you go to school, you go to your instructor during their office hours, you walk in and you say, I was transcribing my notes, or I was annotating my notes, and there was a missing step, or I couldn't figure something out, and could you help me figure it out? Now, what do you think the instructor is, what's going to be their reaction if you walked in and you did that? Huh? First of all, it's going to be a little bit of shock. But are they going to be willing to help you? Sure, this is what they're looking for, students that are like that. They have those questions. Then what you do is once you get it answered, you put it in your notes and you throw away the Post-it. You'll notice I still got a lot of Post-its there. There's a lot of questions I never got answered. They just never got resolved. But a lot of times when you go in to see your instructor with those Post-its, not only do they explain stuff to you, they might use a question off the next quiz or test to illustrate it for you. They're being nice. They're rewarding you. Now, I can't guarantee that, but I know it happens. All right? Then, once you've transcribed your notes, you can color code them. And I have a color coding system, which I'm not going to go over, but I use 6 colors. I know it sounds over the top, but hey, it works. And then, as you do stuff, you find out what works and what doesn't work. The can't-dos. See, we like to lecture and tell you what you can do, but sometimes we forget to tell you the can't-dos. Oh, you can't divide by 0, or you can't do this, whatever. And those go into the left column with yellow highlighting, all the can't-dos. You learn those from your homework, you learn those from your quizzes, so that you have them in your notes and you don't repeat them for your finals or for later on. The beauty of this, there's my color coding. Here's an example of index, which you can look at in the examples going around. Here's a sample page that I had from one instructor. Here's an example from one of those notebooks where I put a potential test question over here, questions from students, color coding for topics, color coding for important formulas, things like that. And what this does is it forces you to recreate the logic, and it gives you repetition. So this is probably my last point before I run out of time, and I'm right about where I thought I would be. Have you ever sat in class and the instructor explained something and you said, oh, I understand that. But then when you got back and you're looking at it again and you're going, I understood the logic when he or she said it, but now I can't, what? It was pretty easy when, have you ever had that experience? Especially in math. It is a lot easier to follow somebody else's logic than to recreate it yourself. So what this method does is it forces you to recreate the logic so you can start to own it yourself, and you could be the one that could explain it. When you took your notes the first time, you had 3 repetitions of the material. Hearing it, writing it, and then reading what you were writing. When you transcribe your notes, you get 3 more repetitions. You're copying it, or you're reading it, you're copying it in there, and then you're reading it yourself. You've got 6 repetitions of the material, in the way I count, in going through that process, plus figuring out the logic. And now the next day you go into class for the next lecture, and they start putting stuff on the board, you're right there, aren't you? You're right up to speed, and you can follow. Now sometimes you might get lost after 45 minutes. Sometimes you might get lost after 10 minutes. But sometimes you go through the whole lecture and you understood it because you were building on stuff. Now when you go transcribe your notes, it's really not that hard because you're more up to speed. If you were trying to learn 3 weeks worth of material in one night before a test, that gets pretty gnarly, doesn't it? With this method, when it comes time for the quiz or the test, you're not learning the material for the first time. You're reviewing the material. And when you study for the test, you're reviewing for the material, you're not cramming for it. So you spent a few more hours in the transcription phase, but it saved you time later on. And I contend that this is actually less time than the traditional Cal Poly student puts in. But the difference is here you learn the material. And students that have used this approach have found that they do better on their tests, they have less stress, they're more relaxed, and there's some other benefits, but I'm out of time, so I'm going to stop here. But did I get your attention at all today? Okay. Well, I'm going to pick up with this next time, and I'm going to teach you some more stuff, and looking forward to it. Do you have a question, though?
Is there any way we can get a copy of the PowerPoint?
Yes, from her. She has a master, and if you go ahead and go and Google me on Cal Poly Pomona, you'll actually find about a 10 or 12 page single-spaced version of this. Yeah. Okay. Economize on in order to cover the more intimate stuff about taking notes and math study skills. But it talks about balancing your schedule, some policies you should know about, choosing classes. I think for many of you this is pretty standard stuff. Choosing instructors I did want to mention before I moved on. And I've noticed we do a survey in our department about students, and it's an advising survey, and we get an idea of what their attitudes are about advising and everything. And one of the interesting things has to do with choosing instructors. And I recommend that you look for instructors and you counsel the students you're tutoring to find instructors that are good teachers, not necessarily student instructors that are known to be easy or something like that. And some students like to use those instructor rating websites, and those could be useful if they're used properly. But the caution here is that the easiest instructor may actually be the one that causes you the most work. Why? Because you end up having to learn the material on your own. Or you have to relearn the material. In this survey question on our survey, it says, I sometimes refer to websites such as rateyourprofessor.com or gradecalpoly.com when choosing instructors. Now, the yellow bar on the right are students that responded to the survey that have a 3.0 GPA or higher, and the blue bar represents students that have a 2.5 GPA or less. Here's an interesting thing to note. The biggest users of those websites were the lower GPA students. And look, on the strongly disagree column that they use it, there were, you'll notice that the highest, the only bar, and it was fairly high, was for the better students. And so I don't know, maybe there's a message there. Maybe some people are overusing those sites, or they're looking for the wrong thing. And all those sites, each one has a little different bent. They have a little different strategy. Some is trying to tell you who the easiest ones are, and some are trying to tell you who the most challenging ones are and stuff. So that's part one. I skipped a couple of topics as you saw in there, but that allows me to move on to part two, see how far we get. These are the inside class activities, like note-taking in particular. And I'm going to start out with mentioning that I teach 3 different note-taking strategies: the transcription method, the annotation method, and the St. Pi method. The transcription method is one that I'm going to spend the most time on, and then I'm going to spend a little bit more, probably the second most time will be on the St. Pi method, and then least amount on the annotation method. But what I'm doing is teaching a way of learning the material during the course of the class, while you're doing your homework, while you're taking notes, while you're taking classes, so that you don't end up cramming for stuff the night before the quiz or the night before the test. And you all know what cramming is, right? That's where you just spend an inordinate amount of time the night before trying to learn the material. Now we know cramming goes on, don't we? My question is, if a person did all their homework, why do they have to cram? It's because they did their homework, but they didn't learn anything. They got stuff on paper and they handed it in, but they didn't learn it. My method is trying to change that. And the problem with cramming is it's all short-term memory oriented, isn't it? It's how much can I cram into my head tonight, so I'll have it tomorrow. And if I don't know it 2 days from now, I'm not going to worry about that. Now, the transcription method involves rewriting your notes. The annotation and the St. Pi method don't involve rewriting your notes. So the transcription method is more time-consuming, so you can't do that in every class. You have to be discreet about which classes you do it in, and it's probably going to be maybe 1 class per quarter, at most 2. So you have to plan ahead for that. But that would be for your classes like calculus, math analysis, statics, dynamics, some statistics classes, not all of them. Classes that have, say operations research, classes that have a lot of mathematics, step-by-step, details, patterns you need to learn,